They laughed when he bid $300 for the old forge. Then a knife maker drove 9 hours with cash. It happened in October of 2011 in the town of Harmony, Pennsylvania, population 893. The laugh wasn't cruel, not at first. It was the kind of soft, sympathetic chuckle a crowd gives a local character, a sound that acknowledged a familiar sentimentality they could no longer afford. The man who made the bid was Silas Blackwood. He was 78 years old, had been a blacksmith for 62 of those years, and was known for two things: the unwavering straightness of his fences and his habit of answering a question only after a silence long enough to make a person ask it again. He stood in the back of the town hall gymnasium, his hands resting on the worn canvas straps of the bag slung over his shoulder, a bag that had belonged to his father. The bid was for Lot 74, listed in the auction catalog as Miscellaneous Ferrous Scrap, includes Anvil and Forge Assembly. To the town council and to Mr. Gerald Davies, the auctioneer they had hired from Pittsburgh, Lot 74 was a 4,280-pound liability of rust and brick, taking up space in the old municipal works building. To Silas Blackwood, it was the memory of 4 generations written in iron and fire. Let me tell you about the forge, because the story isn't about the $300 or even the laughter. It's about what a thing is worth versus what it costs. The forge was first fired in 1888 by Hezekiah Blackwood, Silas's great-grandfather. Hezekiah had come to Harmony from the coalfields of Wales, carrying nothing but a set of 3 hammers in a roll of oilcloth and a leather-bound book filled with metallurgical notes written in a cramped, sloping script. He was 24 years old. The town of Harmony, then the burgeoning waypoint for farmers heading west, gave him a plot of land, 3/4 of an acre on the bend of Connoquenessing Creek, in exchange for a 10-year contract to shoe the town's horses and repair its plows. Hezekiah built the forge himself. The bricks for the hearth he fired from local clay, mixing it with a specific ratio of sand and horsehair, a formula from his book. He built the chimney 28 feet high, 2 feet higher than any other in the county, creating a draft so powerful it could bring a fire from a dull orange glow to a shimmering white heat in under 4 minutes. The heart of the forge wasn't the hearth, though. It was the anvil. It was a 312-pound hay button forged in Brooklyn, New York, and shipped to Harmony on a series of freight trains and horse-drawn wagons. It arrived on May 11, 1889. Hezekiah paid $94 for it, the equivalent of 6 months' earnings. He didn't mount it on a simple oak stump as most smiths did. He spent 2 weeks building a complex base of stacked yellow pine, cut and planed to slot together, cross-hatched and interlocked. The final structure was then soaked in linseed oil for 40 days. The result was a mounting that didn't just absorb the shock of a hammer blow, it returned it. The rebound was so perfect, so alive, that a skilled smith could feel the steel moving under his hammer, not as a dead, resistant mass, but as a partner in the work. It was said that Hezekiah's anvil had a ring like a church bell, a clear G-sharp that would echo across the creek on a cold morning. For 45 years, Hezekiah Blackwood worked that forge. He made wagon wheels that never warped and plowshares that could slice through Pennsylvania clay for a decade before needing to be resharpened. His most famous work was the iron gate for the Harmony Town Cemetery, a delicate lacework of twisting vines and oak leaves forged from a single 400-pound bar of Swedish wrought iron. That gate, installed in 1903, still stands. It has been repainted 4 times, but has never shown a spot of rust, a fact that modern metallurgists would find puzzling, but that Hezekiah would have simply called correct. When Hezekiah died in 1934, the forge passed to his son, Thomas. Thomas Blackwood was a different kind of man, quieter, less of a pioneer, and more of a custodian. He inherited the forge at the dawn of the Great Depression. The age of the horse was ending. The first Fordson tractors had begun to appear in the fields around Harmony, and the demand for horseshoes and plowshares was dwindling. Thomas adapted. He learned to repair the new machines, welding cracked engine blocks and forging replacement gear teeth that were often stronger than the factory originals. Let me tell you about his quenching tank, because it matters. Hezekiah's original tank was a simple wooden trough. In 1938, Thomas replaced it. He dug a pit 6 feet deep into the packed earth floor of the smithy, lined it with fieldstone, and then rendered the interior waterproof with a mixture of pine tar and beeswax. He filled it not just with water, but with a brine solution whose recipe was a secret. It contained salt, of course, but also other things whispered about in the family. Rainwater collected during a thunderstorm, lye from hickory ash, and a small, carefully measured amount of oil skimmed from the surface of the creek. This wasn't alchemy, it was chemistry, learned through generations of trial and error. The specific cooling rate of this brine solution could impart a differential hardness to a blade that was impossible to achieve with plain water or modern petroleum oils. A knife quenched in the Blackwood tank would have a spine soft enough to absorb shock and an edge hard enough to hold its sharpness through the dressing of 3 deer. Thomas ran the forge through World War II, repairing farm equipment to support the war effort. His son, Jacob, Silas's father, took over in 1952. Jacob was the artist of the family. He loved the clean lines of modern design. He used the old forge not for brute farm work, but for architectural ironwork. He made railings, chandeliers, and fireplace tools for the new houses being built in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. He was the one who added a second, smaller forge for more delicate work and installed a 50-pound Little Giant power hammer to speed up the initial drawing out of the stock. But he always did the finishing work by hand, on Hezekiah's anvil, listening for that G-sharp ring to tell him the steel was true. He believed the forge had a spirit. He would talk to it. He would thank it at the end of the day. His wife said he was a fool, but his customers paid him handsome sums for gates and railings that felt alive to the touch. In 1971, the town of Harmony, in a fit of civic modernization, decided to consolidate its public works. They tore down the old sheds and buildings along the creek, including the original smithy Hezekiah had built. But the forge was too heavy, too integrated into the foundation to be easily moved or demolished. So they built the new, soulless, concrete block municipal garage around it. For a time, Jacob was allowed to continue using it, a strange, anachronistic tenant in a building filled with road salt and diesel fumes. He died of a heart attack in 1979, his hammer in his hand, standing before the cold hearth. And that brought the legacy to Silas. Silas Blackwood was 46 when his father died. He had learned the trade at his father's side since he was old enough to hold a hammer, but by 1979, the world had little use for a blacksmith. What Jacob had done as art, others now did with machines, mass-producing decorative ironwork in factories in Taiwan. Silas tried to keep the business alive. He made what he could. He repaired the town's snowplows and garbage trucks. The mechanics in the garage called him in when a bolt was seized or a frame was bent. They respected his skill, but saw him as a relic. He was the last resort, the man you called when the modern tools failed. He worked in that corner of the municipal garage for 32 years. The town let him use the space for free, a gesture of respect for his family's history. In return, he did all the town's welding and metal repair for the cost of materials alone. It was a quiet, unwritten agreement that lasted until the spring of 2011. That was the year the money ran out. Harmony, like 1,000 other small towns in the Rust Belt, was slowly dying. The textile mill had closed in 1994. The dairy cooperative followed in 2003. Young people left for college and never came back. The tax base shrank to just 412 households. The town council, led by a 52-year-old former insurance salesman named Robert Mosley, was facing a budget deficit of $112,000. They needed to do something visible, to show they were fighting for the town's future. They settled on a Main Street revitalization project. The plan involved installing 22 antique-style lampposts and burying the overhead power lines. The total cost was projected at $250,000. They secured a state grant for $200,000, but needed to raise the remaining $50,000 themselves. So they decided to liquidate assets. They would sell off everything the town owned that wasn't bolted down and essential. This included 3 retired police cars, a fleet of obsolete typewriters, a dozen oak desks, and a 1978 road grader with a cracked block. And of course, the contents of the municipal garage that weren't in active use. Which brought them to Lot 74. Mr. Gerald Davies was hired to run the auction. He was 45 years old, wore tailored suits that looked out of place in harmony, and spoke with the clipped, confident cadence of a man who believes all value can be expressed in numbers. He had been in the asset liquidation business for 20 years. He saw the world as a collection of items to be cataloged, appraised, and sold to the highest bidder. He walked through the municipal garage with a clipboard and a digital camera. He spent 4 minutes looking at the forge. He saw a pile of crumbling brick, a rusty iron hood, and a set of bellows with cracked leather. He saw the anvil, pitted and scarred from a century of use. He tapped it with a ball-peen hammer he carried. It made a dull thud. The pine base, dry and neglected for years, no longer provided its resonant return. He took a photo, noted its approximate weight, and moved on. His appraisal was based on the current scrap price for mixed steel and iron, $140 per ton. At just over 2 tons, he valued the entire assembly at approximately $300, with a potential upside if a collector saw some decorative value in the anvil. He wrote in his notes, Lot 74, Miscellaneous Ferrous Scrap, estimated value $300 to $500. He was not a malicious man. He was simply a man who could not see what was not on his spreadsheet. Silas learned of the auction from a notice pinned to the corkboard at the post office. He read the list of items, and his eyes stopped on Lot 74. He felt a coldness spread through his chest, the same coldness he'd felt the day his father died. He went to the town council meeting the following Tuesday. He sat in the back, his canvas bag on his lap. He listened as Robert Mosley and Gerald Davies explained how the auction would fund the new beginning for the town. When they were finished, Silas raised his hand. It took them a moment to notice him. Mosley said, Yes, Silas, do you have a question? Silas stood up. He was not a tall man, but years of swinging a hammer had given him a solid, rooted presence. He spoke slowly. The forge, he said. Lot 74. That forge belongs to the town, but it was built by my family. It has always been a Blackwood forge. Mr. Davies smiled a patient, professional smile. We appreciate the history, Mr. Blackwood. We really do, and you'll have the opportunity to bid on it like everyone else. We're hoping to get a fair price for it. Scrap is fetching a decent rate right now. It's not scrap, Silas said. The word came out quieter than he intended. Davies' smile tightened. With all due respect, sir, it is the very definition of scrap. It's 2 tons of obsolete industrial equipment. We're selling it by the pound. Silas looked at the council members, men whose fathers and grandfathers had their plows repaired by his father and grandfather. He saw no recognition in their eyes. He saw only the weary anxiety of men trying to balance a budget. He sat back down without another word. He knew then that he could not explain it to them. The value of the forge was not something that could be articulated in a town meeting. It could only be demonstrated. The week before the auction, Silas's grandson, Leo, came to visit. Leo was 22, a good kid, studying business at a community college 60 miles away. He loved his grandfather, but he saw him through a lens of gentle pity. He saw a man left behind by time. They sat in Silas's small kitchen, the air thick with the smell of coffee and old wood. Grandpa, Leo said, I heard about the auction. You're not really going to try and buy that old thing, are you? I'm going to bid, Silas said, stirring his coffee. But why? It's junk. The town needs the money for the revitalization project. It's for the best. Silas looked at his grandson. He saw a bright young man who understood spreadsheets and business plans, but who had never felt the heat of a forge or the solid satisfaction of turning a raw piece of iron into something useful and true. He thought about trying to explain it. He thought about telling him about Hezekiah's bricks, about the G-sharp ring of the anvil, about the secret brine in the quenching tank that his own father had passed to him in a sealed letter to be opened only upon his death. The letter contained just 17 words, a recipe, and a warning.
The water remembers the lightning. Do not waste it on common steel. How could he explain that to a boy who lived in a world of disposable things? So he said, "It's not junk, Leo." Leo sighed, a sound of frustrated affection. "Okay, Grandpa, but don't get your hopes up. They said the scrap dealer from Butler is coming. He'll bid over $1,000 for it. You can't afford that." Silas had $342 in his checking account. He had another $80 in cash and a coffee can in the cupboard. He knew Leo was right. He couldn't afford it, but he also knew that price and value were two different things. He had spent his life working with materials that had an inherent, unchangeable nature. You could not argue with steel. You could not persuade it to be harder or softer than its carbon content allowed. You could only understand it and work with it. He felt the same way about the forge. Its value was inherent. It did not depend on the opinion of an auctioneer or a town council. He would make his bid. It was the only thing he could do. The day of the auction was cold and gray. A damp chill seeped into the gymnasium of the Harmony Town Hall.
74 people sat on metal folding chairs arranged in neat rows. They were mostly older residents, mixed with a few out-of-town dealers looking for bargains. Mr. Davies stood at a podium on the basketball court, his voice amplified by a small, tinny PA system. Leo sat beside his grandfather in the back row, looking uncomfortable. Silas was calm. He had the canvas bag on the floor between his feet. Inside was a thermos of coffee, a sandwich, and the smallest of the 3 hammers his great-grandfather had carried from Wales. It was a 400-gram cross-peen hammer, its hickory handle worn smooth and dark from a century of hands. He didn't know why he had brought it. He just felt he needed to. The auction moved quickly. Davies was efficient. He sold the police cars for an average of $1,200 each. He sold the oak desks for $50 apiece. He bundled the typewriters into a single lot that went for $25 to a woman who planned to use them for an art project. The bidding was listless. The total was climbing, but slowly. They were at $8,450 when Davies announced Lot 73, the road grader. It was the big-ticket item, but the scrap dealer from Butler, a heavy man named Jim Carnes, knew about the cracked block. He opened the bidding at $1,500, and no one else made a sound. Sold for $1,500. A wave of disappointment went through the room. The grand total was now just under $10,000, a far cry from the $50,000 they needed. You could feel the hope seeping out of the gymnasium. And then Davies said, "All right, folks, Lot 74. This is the last of the major items from the garage." He clicked a button, and a grainy photo of the forge appeared on the projector screen behind him. "As you can see, we have a large quantity of ferrous scrap. An old blacksmith's forge, anvil, bellows, the works. It's all got to go. We're selling it as one lot. The scrap value alone is around $300, so let's open the bidding there. Do I hear $300? Silence. The dealers looked at the photo and saw work. They saw hours of labor to break the thing apart and haul it to a scrapyard. Jim Carnes, the scrap man, sat with his arms crossed. He would wait. He knew he was the only one who could handle that kind of tonnage. Why bid against himself? Davies' professional cheerfulness started to fray. $300, folks. It's money for the taking. 2 tons of steel. Who'll start me at $300? From the back of the room, a quiet voice. I bid $300. It was Silas. Every head in the gymnasium turned. Leo sank lower in his chair, his face flushed. Mr. Davies squinted toward the back. Who was that? Silas Blackwood? He couldn't hide his surprise. Well, all right, we have a bid. $300 from Mr. Blackwood. Thank you, sir. And that's when the laughter started. It began as a few stifled snorts, then grew into a low, rolling chuckle that filled the room. It was the sound of people who knew Silas, knew his meager income, knew his sentimental attachment to the past. They saw a proud old man making a futile gesture, bidding the exact scrap value for a pile of junk he could never afford to outbid. Robert Mosley, the council president, shook his head with a sad smile. Jim Carnes, the scrap dealer, grinned. He let the laughter die down. He was enjoying this. Davies tried to regain control. We have $300. Do I hear $350? $350? Carnes uncrossed his arms. He raised a single, thick finger. 500, he said, his voice booming. Thank you, Mr. Carnes, Davies said, a note of relief in his voice. We have 500. Now we're moving. Do I hear 550? He looked toward the back of the room. Mr. Blackwood? Silas didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his hands resting on the chair in front of him. His face was unreadable. He had made his bid. That was all he could do. He had stated the forge's opening price. The rest was out of his hands. 500 once, Davies said, his patter speeding up. 500 twice. Leo leaned over to his grandfather. Let it go, Grandpa, he whispered. Please. Silas looked at his grandson, and for the first time that day he smiled, a small, sad smile. It's all right, son, he said. And then a sound cut through the stale air of the gymnasium. It was not a sound anyone expected. It was the rumble of a heavy-duty diesel engine, followed by the crunch of tires on the gravel of the town hall parking lot. The sound grew louder, then stopped right outside the gymnasium's side door. A moment later, that door opened. The man who stepped inside was not from Harmony. He was in his late 30s, tall and lean, with a neatly trimmed black beard. He wore dusty work boots, jeans stained with something dark, and a clean pressed shirt. He moved with a purpose that made everyone in the room stop and watch.
He ignored the auctioneer at the podium. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then they found Silas in the back. He walked directly toward him, his boots echoing on the polished wooden floor. The room was utterly silent. He stopped in front of Silas. He looked at Silas, then at the grainy photo on the projector screen. Mr. Blackwood, he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Silas nodded. My name is Elias Thorne, the man said. I drove up from North Carolina. I heard about this auction on a forum, a very obscure one for bladesmiths. He paused. Is that it? He gestured with his chin toward the screen. That's it, Silas said. Thorne stared at the picture for a long time. The whole room waited. Mr. Davies stood at the podium, his mouth slightly open, his auctioneer's rhythm completely broken. Thorne seemed to be looking not at the picture, but through it, at something only he could see. He looked at the shape of the hood, the construction of the firepot, the massive, squat form of the anvil's base. The base, he said, almost to himself. It's yellow pine, isn't it? Stacked and interlocked. Silas nodded again. And the quenching tank, is it still there, the one dug into the floor? It's there, Silas said, covered with plywood, but it's there. Elias Thorne closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath, like a man savoring a rare aroma. When he opened them, he looked directly at Silas. My master, he said. He studied under a man in Japan who had once met an American smith in the 1950s. This American told him about a forge in Pennsylvania, a forge built by a Welshman with a special hearth and an anvil that rang like a bell, and a quenching solution made with lightning water. He said the steel that came from that forge was alive. My master thought it was a legend, a story you tell apprentices to teach them about respecting their tools. He never believed it was a real place. He reached into the pocket of his shirt and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a photograph, old and faded. It showed a younger Jacob Blackwood standing proudly next to a finished fireplace screen of incredible complexity. But Thorne wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the corner of the photo, at the blurred image of the forge behind Jacob. I've been looking for this place for 15 years, Thorne said. Not for the forge itself, but for the knowledge it holds. He then turned to face Mr. Davies, who looked completely bewildered. What's the current bid on this lot? Davies stammered. $500. From Mr. Carnes here. Thorne didn't even look at Carnes. He looked at Robert Mosley, the council president, who was now standing up. Sir, he said, my name is Elias Thorne. I am a bladesmith. I make custom knives that I sell to chefs and collectors around the world.
My waiting list is 3 years long. A single knife of mine sells for between $2,000 and $5,000.
He paused, letting that sink in. That forge is not scrap metal. It is a unique and irreplaceable piece of industrial heritage. The specific combination of the draft from that chimney, the reflective properties of that hearth, the rebound from that anvil base, and the chemistry of that quenching tank creates an environment for working high-carbon steel that cannot be replicated by any modern equipment. It is, for my craft, the equivalent of a Stradivarius violin. He unzipped the front of his jacket. Underneath, he was wearing a leather money belt, not a flimsy tourist pouch, but a thick, sturdy belt with multiple zippered compartments. He unzipped one. He reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills held together by a rubber band. "I am prepared to offer $18,000 for it," he said, his voice calm and even. "In cash, right now." The sound in the room was a collective gasp.
74 people, who moments before had been laughing at a $300 bid, were now staring at a pile of cash that was more money than most of them saw in 6 months. Jim Carnes, the scrap dealer, slowly sank back in his chair, his face pale. Leo, who had been hiding his face in shame, was now bolt upright, his eyes wide, looking from the cash to his grandfather and back again. Mr. Davies, the man of numbers, was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His entire system of valuation had just been shattered. He had appraised an asset at $300 that was now commanding a bid 36 times his highest estimate. Robert Mosley found his voice first. $18,000? He stammered. "Yes," Thorne said, "but the offer comes with a condition." He turned back to Silas. "The forge cannot be moved. Its value is in its location, the way it's seated in the earth, the chimney, the tank. To move it would be to destroy it. I will pay the town $18,000 for the forge and a 20-year lease on the corner of the garage it occupies. And," he added, turning to look directly at Silas with profound respect, "the second condition is that Mr. Blackwood agrees to teach me what he knows. I am not buying an object. I am buying the right to become a student." All eyes turned to Silas. The old man hadn't moved. He looked at Thorne, this stranger who had driven 547 miles and understood the forge in a way no one else, not even his own grandson, had. He looked at the pile of cash. He looked at the shocked faces of the town council and the silent crowd. He reached down and picked up the canvas bag at his feet. He unzipped it and took out the small 400-gram hammer. He held it out to Elias Thorne. The handle was dark with the sweat and oil of 4 generations. He said, "We start on Monday." The climax was not the gasp of the crowd. It wasn't the sight of the money or the dumbfounded expression on the auctioneer's face. The climax was a quiet moment that happened after. After the papers were signed, after the bewildered town council had accepted the offer with dazed formality, after the crowd had dispersed, murmuring in disbelief, Silas and Leo and Elias Thorne were standing alone in the empty parking lot next to Thorne's dusty Ford F-250. The sky was spitting a cold rain. Leo finally spoke, his voice cracking. "Grandpa, I don't understand. You knew it was worth that much." Silas looked at his grandson, his eyes full of a deep, weary kindness. "No, son," he said. "I didn't know what it was worth in dollars. I just knew what it was. There's a difference." Thorne, who had been quietly listening, added, "Your grandfather didn't bid $300 because he thought that was its price. He bid $300 because that's what he had. It was an act of faith, not commerce. Let me tell you what happened next, because the story doesn't end with the money. Elias Thorne did not move the forge. He moved to Harmony. He rented a small house a mile from the municipal garage. For the next 2 years, from 2011 to 2013, he spent 5 days a week at the forge. He arrived at 7 a.m. and worked until 5 p.m. His teacher was Silas Blackwood. Silas didn't lecture. He taught the way he had been taught. He would demonstrate a technique once, then hand Thorn the hammer. He would watch, his eyes missing nothing. He would say things like, "Too hot, you're burning the carbon out." Or, "Listen, the anvil will tell you when the grain is aligned." Thorn, a master in his own right, became a humble apprentice. He learned the rhythm of the bellows, the color of a perfect welding heat, the sound of the G-sharp ring that meant the steel was ready. Leo started visiting on weekends. At first, he would just watch, standing awkwardly by the door. Then, one Saturday, Silas handed him a pair of tongs and told him to hold a piece of steel in the fire. Leo's hand shook.
The steel got too hot, and the end fizzled and sparked, ruined. He expected Silas or Thorn to be angry. Instead, Silas just took the ruined piece, threw it in the scrap bin, and handed him another. "That's the first lesson," he said. "Steel is expensive. Pay attention to the fire." Leo kept coming back. He postponed his business degree. He started by sweeping the floors and cleaning the tools. Then he learned to manage the fire. After a year, Silas let him use the 400-gram hammer. He was clumsy, his hammer blows were uneven, but he didn't quit. He had seen something that day at the auction, something that his business textbooks could never explain. He had seen the difference between a price tag and true value. The town of Harmony got its $18,000. They bought their 22 antique-style lampposts. They looked nice. They did not, however, revitalize Main Street. The stores remained empty. The young people did not return. The town's salvation came not from the lampposts, but from the forge.
Word spread through the exclusive world of high-end cutlery. Articles appeared in magazines like Blade and La Passion de Couture. People started coming to Harmony. Not tourists looking for quaint lampposts, but serious collectors, chefs, and other craftsmen. They wanted to see the legendary Blackwood forge. They wanted to meet the man who had resurrected it and the old master who had preserved it. They would spend money. They stayed at the town's only motel. They ate at the diner. The owner of the hardware store started stocking specialized abrasives and hardwoods for Thorn and his growing number of students. A quiet, organic revival began, centered not on a manufactured idea of a charming small town, but on a real center of master craftsmanship. Silas Blackwood passed away in the winter of 2014 at the age of 81. He died peacefully in his sleep. His funeral was held in the same town hall gymnasium where the auction had taken place. It was standing room only. Elias Thorn spoke.
He didn't talk about Silas's kindness or his long life. He talked about his hands. He described how Silas could tell the temperature of a piece of steel to within 10 degrees just by the quality of the light it threw on the ceiling. He described how Silas could straighten a bent bar of steel with 3 precise hammer blows, where it would take Thorn himself a dozen. He ended by holding up the small 400-gram hammer. "This hammer," he said, "contains more knowledge than any book I have ever read." After Silas's death, Thorn formally took on Leo as his full-time apprentice. The town council, led by a newly humbled Robert Mosley, unanimously voted to rename the municipal garage the Blackwood Thorn Center for Artisanal Steel. They leased the entire building to Thorn for $1 a year. Thorn expanded. He brought in other artisans, a leather worker to make sheaths, a woodworker to craft custom knife handles. The building that once housed rusting snowplows became a vibrant hub of activity. By 2019, 5 years after Silas's death, 6 new families had moved to Harmony, all drawn by the work at the forge. The diner had to hire a second waitress. A small coffee shop opened on Main Street. The town's population ticked up over 900 for the first time in 20 years. The story of the auction became a local legend, told and retold until the facts grew hazy. But the core of it remained true. It was a story about a community that, in its desperation for a quick fix, nearly sold its soul for scrap. It was a story about 2 men, one who measured value in dollars per ton, and another who measured it in generations of accumulated knowledge. The world is full of Mr. Davieses, men who are very good at calculating the price of everything, but understand the value of nothing. They have spreadsheets and data and market analysis.
Their logic is clean, efficient, and almost always wrong when it comes to things that matter. Because the things that truly matter, the things that endure, are not commodities. They have a history. They hold knowledge. They are the product of patience and a deep, abiding respect for the materials of the world. A thing is not just what it is what it remembers. The hay-button anvil remembers the feel of Hezekiah's first hammer blow. The quenching tank remembers the lightning. And a town that had forgotten its own history was saved not by a plan for the future, but by a quiet, stubborn old man who refused to let them throw their memory away. He made a bid of $300, a number the world laughed at. But his bid was not a number, it was a principle. And it turned out to be the only thing that was truly priceless.